And we're back, and we have more amazing anime. Join us on the Film Swap podcast.
Here is a motion picture film. Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Film Swap. My name is David Seeley, and who is that gaucho amigo? Why, it's none other than the ecstatic gaucho himself, Mr. Jonathan Pritchard Barrett. Jono, are you all right?
I'm very well, David. Good to see you again.
I think you might be a bit more ecstatic than usual because we have an extra super special guest on the show tonight, don't we? Would you like to introduce her?
I certainly will. Tonight we have Teniola Soyegu, Kawaii anime artist. So, could you tell us a little bit more about Kawaii anime?
Yeah, sure. Hi guys. So my art style generated from finding anime at an early age from manga. So when I say I do kawaii anime art, my eyes are big, they're sparkly, they're full of color. The characters tend to always look very young, so most like 16 and under. But yeah, the main thing is that it's big, sparkly, big eyes, and just full of color.
Lovely. Sounds great.
Great. Have you've been doing it for a long time?
I've been drawing for probably 20 years, but actually doing it well for the last 6 years.
Yeah, and you do a lot of like sort of conventions, like comic conventions and things like that.
Yeah, go to Comic Cons, probably 3 or 4 cons a year, trading, selling my art, which is either in stickers, prints. Sometimes we do some calendars as well and badges.
Brilliant.
And all in the UK, or have you been overseas to do it?
So only in the UK, but I'm planning to apply for my first con in France and Germany next year.
Oh, wow. That's very exciting.
Brilliant. And listeners may have seen some of Tenny's work before because she very kindly last year in our first anime episode, she very kindly supplied the artwork for our thumbnail that went on all of our social media stuff and is still on there. If people want to check that out, that episode's still available, of course. It's one of our more popular episodes, and it's called Amazing Anime. And so popular was it, in fact, that, of course, this is our first ever Film Swap sequel, isn't it? Where we've come back to have a revisit of a previous theme. And tonight we're revisiting amazing anime, more amazing anime. And who better than to get Tenny on board tonight to talk, because she's a huge anime fan. And of course, her artwork very much is within that realm. And so tonight she came on to recommend a really great film for us to talk about. And we, of course, reciprocated with a very classic anime film from I've forgotten. 1996?
97.
97. Oh, I was close.
Yep.
1997, and it's a film by Satoshi Kon, who's a very famous and amazing filmmaker, who's made several really classic anime films, and this was his very first film that he made. Originally, it was made as it was meant to be a direct-to-video film, but it was so good that the distributors decided to put it in cinemas. And it was quite influential, quite powerful piece of work. And we're going to talk a little bit about it. It's called Perfect Blue. And also, Tenny, we're going to talk about it more in depth in the second half of the show. But could you just give the listeners just a very, very brief introduction to the film that you introduced to us for tonight?
Yep. So the film I introduced, I think only came out 2021. It's a movie called Inu-Oh. It is a movie about classic Japanese music, self-discovery, with an element of sort of yokai spirits and fantasy all intertwined.
Yeah, and it is absolutely brilliant. It was the first time. It was actually a film that totally passed me by when it came out, unfortunately, and I was really happy to discover it through you. And I'm really looking forward to talking about it because it's really quite a feast for the eyes and for the old brain matter as well. I found it was quite amazing, and it's got lots of amazing music set pieces in it as well. It is kind of, you could say that it's a musical, couldn't you? It's like an
Yeah.
animated musical film,
Yeah.
but there's a lot going on there, and it was really interesting, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm looking forward to talking about that in the second half of the show. But first, let's talk about Perfect Blue and show. I think also I'm not talking so much. I'm going to let Jonathan give an introduction to Perfect Blue.
Well, yes, Perfect Blue was directed, as David mentioned earlier, by Satoshi Kon, or should we say Kon Satoshi, as he'd been known in Japan. And I think he'd been a manga, that is sort of comic book artist before
My
he.
Kaka, yeah.
That's it. So he'd been doing the same sort of thing as you, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, and I think he'd won an award for his work, or come being a runner up anyway. And yeah, and this film was like a sort of starter film, or almost like low budget, and but it was so successful, well, such an incredible film that it sort of catapulted him into the big league, basically.
Mm,
And although I think you can see in it that it is on a slightly lower budget than sort of maybe his later films. Anyway, sort of something about the story. So it follows this young woman called Mima Kirigo. I hope that's pronounced right. And she's a sort of J-pop singer in a band called Cham. And I wondered if that was inspired by Wham, except with just changing the W to a C.
yeah, I did wonder that myself, whether that word, maybe that means something, or whether it was just like you say, something like that. But
Yeah.
um, yeah,
But so basically she's sort of getting a little bit older, at least she's maturing, let's put it like this, and she's feeling like, I don't want to be doing this sort of dumb singing business forever. I want to sort of be taken seriously, and I want to be an actress. So she's got this. So she basically leaves the band, and so she gets a job on working in a sort of drama. I'm not sure if it's a soap opera or if it's a sort of
yeah. Well, it seems like
Like
some
a
sort of
TV
a
drama that,
TV
yeah,
drama.
yeah.
It's a bit more, but it does seems to go on quite a long time. That's why I thought it was a soap opera. But yeah, in
it's
terms
kind
of
of like a police procedural sort of television drama, isn't it?
Mm.
right, yeah,
Kind of like a CSI kind of program. That's the impression I got from it.
yeah. So and then basically part of her sort of one of her challenges is basically her fans. She's got these, even though her band is not particularly successful. After she leaves, so they get to number 87, which doesn't seem
Woo.
very high on the charts, frankly. Uh, but anyway, and uh, but yeah, she still has these devoted fans, and then so some of them, and then she gets this letter from one of them saying, "There's I've created a website called Mima's Room," and this is came out in '97, so I guess it may be set a few years earlier. So it's in the very early years of the internet. She said, "What?"
Mm.
Wants to ask a friend, "What's a website?" And I mean, it was funny. I like that bit of it because it sort of took me back to the early days of the internet. What
Yeah,
is a website? What is an email address and all this sort of stuff?
yeah, yeah. It was
And,
all new then. It was quite
Hard to
interesting how
believe.
they're
yeah,
setting up the computer and
yeah.
mm,
And so anyway, it turns out she's basically got this sort of super fan who seems to have created a website that's basically all about her life, who seems to know a lot about her life. So it sounds like she's got a stalker, basically.
mm,
and so who is this stalker? And is one of the questions. And then people start dying at her work. Who's killing them? Is it the stalker? And but
Yeah,
at the
there's
same
like weird things like letter bombs and you
metabombs.
know, and
Yeah,
people like sort of pouncing on you in dark
yeah,
parking garages and
backstage.
things like this.
And but at the same time, she's also suffering. It turns out we sort of, as we learn more about her, she's sort of suffering from some mental health issues. Basically, I guess the sort of transition from one job to another and all this sort of insecurity
Mm,
in her life means that yeah, she starts sort of having issues, and so really the whole film is becomes like you're never really sure what's real, what's not, who's the murderer. That's never really clear. I mean, it's sort of clear, but not entirely clear.
Well,
And
yeah, even at the end, it's kind of semi-ambiguous, isn't it? Because you
yeah,
kind of, even though they sort of have a big reveal, it's
yeah,
still not always 100% clear that that is actual reality, that that is what's really going on, or whether this is, again, just some sort of a figment of her imagination or an hallucination or
yes,
something like that. So,
exactly. And it's got these other quite nice bits where you're sort of watching scene of the film, and it's very dramatic, and you're completely absorbed in it. And then suddenly, it turns out you're watching the screen, the sort of the TV in the studio. So you're sort
mm,
of pulled out of it. You have that sort of distancing effect, and it's
mm,
almost and that is sort of similar effect with the dreams and her sort of fantasies. Maybe you're sort of so are you which sort of level of reality you're in. In a sense, it has a little bit in common with the Saragossa manuscript we were talking about recently.
yeah, I did think that this would somewhat fit in with the mind-bending sort of titles that we talked about a couple episodes ago.
Yeah, and I think
That'd be mind-bending masterpieces, by the way, listeners, still available wherever you find our podcast.
exactly, and I
Yes,
think that was part of his Satoshi Kon's uh, one of his concerns is the sort of the blurring of sort of the line between fantasy and reality, basically.
mm,
And I mean it's a cartoon, well, you know, animated film, but it's definitely not for children in in,
yes.
in no way. I mean it's a long way from the sort of you know Studio Ghibli films or any other sort of
Yes.
children animation.
And I think it's
Honestly,
fair to
I
say
would
that.
say Ghibli's probably the only one that is targeted for children when you look at anime movies because
Okay.
you've got like Makoto Shinkai. I don't know if you've heard of like Your Name or Belle, but they're movies that are slightly more coming of age. So they do some stuff for teenagers, and then the rest of it
Mm,
is just a mixture of all adult kind of topics.
Okay. That's
yeah,
interesting.
it's not uncommon to see quite strong themes in anime films like this, but
Mm.
I'd actually forgotten. Because I hadn't seen this film for quite some time, and I thought it was a good opportunity to revisit it. And I'd kind of forgotten just how thematically strong it was, and how some
Wow.
of the imagery and some of the circumstances are quite, yes, very adult and very sort of grown up and quite powerful. And I guess the difference is a lot of Japanese anime is quite fantasy based, and a
Right.
lot of it, but whereas this one deals is
I
more
don't know
grounded
about
in
that,
reality.
David.
Sorry,
I don't know if I'd say they're all fantasy based because there's just such a range of genres. But
Right.
then this
sure,
is just
sure.
me and my hardcore anime fan life coming out. But yeah.
No, that's true. Well, you are right. They have sort of like teen romance ones, and they have sort of science fictiony kind of things, and they've got just sort of straight family dramas and all sorts of different things that you wouldn't see in sort of Western, if you will, animation, where predominantly it is almost always geared towards a family sort of market, aren't they? They're very
Yeah.
family oriented sort of children's films essentially. whereas Japanese animation very often can be for grown-ups, and some of it's for kids and some of it's for teenagers.
Mhm.
And there's all sorts of different themes and styles and things, so it's quite a broad range of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this. I feel like after watching this, I need to sort of. I'd like to watch a documentary about sort of the history of a documentary series, probably rather than one, about the
Mm,
history of anime and the different styles and the different directors, and because it seems like there's a whole world out there that
mm.
I need to know about, and I'm
It's
not.
pretty big.
Yeah.
I think the British Museum a couple of years ago, they did an exhibition about manga and its transformation in the last 100 years, which is quite cool.
Oh wow,
Oh, wow, that
I
would have
missed
been
that.
cool.
That's annoying.
We talked a bit about it in the previous anime episode that we did about the fact, because obviously Jonathan and I are a bit older. The fact that when we were growing up, it was very rare for us to see Japanese animation or even any Japanese things really at all on sort of mainstream television and things. And when there were little sort of pockets, little examples of that, I used to gobble it up quite hungrily because I was fascinated by this stuff, and it was something completely different and unique from what you were used to seeing.
Hmm.
But nowadays, it's such a popular, around the world. It's all there's loads of it that's available, and so many. It has such a huge fan base, and lots of people who uh, are familiar with this kind of material now. It's very much become a mainstream thing, which I think is amazing.
Yeah. Well, I did find though it's not that easy to find these films. So
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. I think even though it has become mainstream, like when I started watching anime, the only way I knew how to watch it was to buy DVDs, and it'd be like a small
Mm.
section in HMV with only about 4 or 5 different series.
right.
But they're basically Sony's brought out this streaming company called Crunchyroll, which is basically the alternative to Netflix for anime.
Oh
So
right.
I think it's a slow process, and Netflix itself is actually hosting lots more anime. Like they've just got one of the biggest animes of all time, One Piece. They've just started putting that on Netflix, the current arc that's being streamed. But yeah, for now, it's still a bit behind in terms of making it accessible to everyone.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Crunchyroll you can get access to in the UK.
Yeah,
Oh
Yeah,
right.
and it's just a subscription-based service, isn't it? Like the others, you just sort of pay a monthly fee and then you get
yeah,
access.
exactly.
And I think the thing with anime too that I find, like even when there's a sort of a big film, they kind of come and go quite quickly, don't they? They kind of come
Yeah,
out,
film
and if you
premieres are
don't kind
really
of pick
short.
it up, like the second film that we're going to talk about tonight is a perfect example of that, where that one just passed me right by because it obviously, even though it was quite acclaimed and it had a really good sort of reception, it
Yeah.
just kind of came and went and sort of disappeared before maybe even a lot of people took any notice of it. These two films in particular are not currently on any of the streaming services, are they? The
Yeah,
big
the
one.
ones we're talking about aren't. It's usually just
Yeah,
the main
yeah,
big ones that have had more than a week in the cinema.
yeah.
Right. Okay. So had you seen the film before?
Perfect Blue.
Yeah.
Yep, I saw both. So funny enough, I think 2021, the BFI were doing like an anime film festival. So
Okay.
they showed Perfect Blue. They also showed Graves of the Fireflies,
Yeah.
Paprika, and Inu-Oh was one of the movies that I came across through that festival, which was really fun.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah. I've seen. I think I've seen Tokyo Godfathers by
Oh, I loved that one.
Satoshi Kon, which is great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
I used to
Paprika is especially really amazing as well. That
Mm.
and is it what's it called, Millennium
actress.
Millennium
Actress?
Actress, that was great too.
Yeah, that's quite a classic one now as well. So he's quite an amazing filmmaker. Um,
Yeah, and so was it last year or what 2 years ago that you saw it for the first time then?
No, that was the second time for Perfect Blue because I've watched it before as well.
Right,
But first time for Inua.
right.
hmm.
And so what would you say about it from a anime fan sort of perspective?
Yeah. The thing with like the things that I suppose of people who know a bit more about, well, the ones who proclaim to know a lot about the Japanese community because we watch anime,
Yeah,
is with Perfect Blue, the idol culture in Japan. I think it's still portrayed even in new anime that you see now, but it's just that whole sort of stalker culture and the fact that idols are seen as they're meant to be precious, they're not meant to have any relationships, like they're there to serve their fans. I
right.
think Perfect Blue was a really early example of how what of them sort of like displaying that in an anime format. So
Mm.
that
Okay.
was really interesting. And then, I mean, not that I was like, I understood. Well, I felt like I could relate more with what's happening with the way that guy was sending her notes and that kind of thing, because it's just, well, most of the time you just see it as like idols are told to just take it as if it's normal. So that was quite
Yeah,
Mm.
interesting. And then obviously she was trying to trying to get out of that idol image and become serious because an
yeah,
idol is like a fixed term career. It's not like something you'll make a life like a life living from. So
yeah,
she's trying to break out of that. And because of an idol, that's why they constantly think, oh, she can't do that much. And that's why they gave her some of those questionable jobs as well, because they're like, oh, you're
right.
just going to be a short term thing.
Mm.
Okay, yeah. It's that sort of struggle to be taken seriously,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
But then even that became sort of and there was an element of exploitation to that because whereas before she had this really squeaky clean teeny bopper image, then all of a sudden these predominantly male producers and things were then asking her to take her clothes off,
Mm.
be
Yeah,
in sort of the whole the thing with the rape scene and the all that stuff. So even though she's supposed to be graduating to a more serious type of career as an actress, there's still that same element of exploitation and sort of commodifying her, but just in a different way.
yeah,
So
exactly,
so
exactly.
that's why it's quite powerful. And
Yeah,
I also thought too this time when I was watching it about how you could even interpret it to some extent as a kind of a coming of age thing as well. Like if you take out the direct sort of incidents, but look at it more as the pop idol sort of element of it is more sort of childish and simplistic, and
yeah,
maybe represents her as a child
yeah,
or an adolescent, and then the as she graduates, it's about her becoming a woman and all of the things that come with that in terms of her her about the sexuality and the responsibilities and all those things as well. So that was something I kind of
hmm,
pulled out of it this time when I was revisiting it, which I thought was interesting as well.
yeah. And, and Tony, what do you think of the sort of graphic side of it? Because you're something that you probably notice a bit more than the average viewer.
Yeah. I
Doing this.
mean, the way the scene was done was very disturbing.
Oh
Um,
God.
it but I think it was really well done because it got the message across. I think it was a really well done scene and a powerful scene. And I mean, what became of her was really interesting to watch because I think the first time I watched it, I was probably around the same age she was, about 18.
Oh
So,
wow.
first time I watched it, I was like, it's a good movie, but not my favorite. But then when I recently watched it again, I don't know, it just felt more of interest to me, a bit more not relatable, but
Yeah.
it landed better.
It's a serious film.
Yeah.
You know, it's sort of well, I was a bit sort of surprised how sort of. I mean, I don't know why I was surprised because I've seen The Grave of the Fireflies and sort of a number of other manga anime films that are sort of. So I know that it can deal with extremely serious subjects.
Mm.
But I was somehow, I guess it was maybe it was because it started off with this pop group, and I was sort of okay. I know where I am. It's sort of light, and then suddenly it took quite a sort of dark turn
Mm.
altogether.
Mm.
Yeah, extraordinary stuff, really.
Tenny, what did you make of the stalker character and his because I thought this stuff with the website that he created and this whole sort of you know
Obsession with her.
yeah, his obsession, but then the angle, the fact that when she looked at the website and discovered that the things that he was writing, like it was her, were really, really accurate. And that was quite so. Was I mean, you could interpret the film a number of ways, but do you think the stalker, was he real, or was he more of just an expression of her psyche, or was it something else, or was it both, or was it? I don't
Hmm.
know.
I think he was real. For me, it makes more sense that he was real, but I guess maybe it's like because sometimes when people get really obsessed with something, like when actors are just sort of like trying to familiarize themselves with characters, they almost become the character. So I
Mm,
think in a similar way, the stalker was obsessing about her so much that he was like, I'm just going to become her on an online platform, speak for
mm,
her as if I am her, that kind of thing, which
Yeah.
again is super creepy, but it was entertaining to watch regardless.
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, one of the interesting things to me is that because you could indeed see him around, he was also, when she was out, he was often almost always there in a way.
yeah,
Mm,
But one of the things he seemed to be knowing about her was that he was sort of. I got the feeling he was sort of, you know, watching her through the window of her flat, which was
yep.
often she had her curtains open, and you sort of thought, and that side of it was one of the things that gave it a slightly Hitchcockian aspect. Because I was thinking of Rear Window, except the sort of opposite, rather than the photographer looking out, she was being observed by this sort of
mm,
stalker somewhere. But we never saw that. We it was just a sort of empty sort of cityscape whenever she looked out of the window, which was a sort of strange quality. Although I did notice towards the end, because I always thought, if you know you've got a stalker, close the damn curtains. You
yes,
know.
you'd think so, kind of,
But towards the end, she sort of did, and I felt less anxious to have her friend once she'd done that.
mm,
But yeah, it's funny because he had this funny look as well. He's sort of slightly sort of, you know, I don't know, rather unpleasant looking character, wasn't he?
yeah. Well, wasn't there an implication in it that I picked up that they suggested that he was perhaps the victim of a car accident or something, which where he'd been injured,
Disfigured.
and that which
Okay.
would explain some of the sort of the dis. I don't know if disfigurement was right, because he
Yeah.
wasn't really disfigured, but he had kind of a funny shape to his
Yeah.
face and his eyes and things. And I don't know if maybe I imagined that, or whether um, I picked that out of it was just like a passing reference that I took to say, oh, is that him? Is that a reference to him? They had like a reference. It was like either a newspaper clipping or some character mentioned something. But because the film, sometimes there's kind of like the film within the film stuff with the TV series
Mm,
and other things with the pop performances and stuff, that sometimes it was difficult to, you had to sort of interpret whether is this real, or is this just part of the show, or is this part of her imagination, or is this, so it just makes that more interesting, that dynamic about pulling information out of it.
Mm.
um, and I quite like the bits when they had the other little fans, not the obsessive kind of stalker fans, but obviously quite hardcore fans, and they'd sometimes show them just having little conversations in a shop or while
mm,
they're waiting for the band to come on,
Yeah.
and they'd be saying these things, and it was a good observation about how people, when we have celebrities that we see a lot on television and films and things, that we make a lot of assumptions that we kind of know them, or that we have, that we
have a
somehow
special
have
connection
some
with
some
them.
insights or informed opinion
Mm.
about what their lives are like.
Mm.
It kind of reminded me of, because I remember, do you remember, I don't know how long ago it was, but there was all that stuff about Britney Spears when she was having some, I don't know, I can't
Nervous
really
breakdown.
remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, but she had some sort of dispute with her parents or something about her custodianship or
Oh yeah.
something. And
Mm.
I remember having just overhearing or people trying to pull me into really strange conversations about how they felt about Brittany and what they thought was going on. And that those little bits in the film reminded me of that sort of strange thing that people have, that when they hear about these stories in the media about celebrities and things, that they somehow know and should have an opinion and it's sort of some idea about what they're talking about,
Yeah.
even though these are people that we don't know and we have no real connection with aside from buying their records or watching them on TV or whatever. So
Yeah.
Mm.
I thought that little element of it was interesting as well, like a nice observation.
Yes. So can I raise the question of the ending? So anybody
Sure.
listening might want to pause it and watch the film and come back.
I don't know. I don't think you have to worry about spoiling it so much because it's again kind of like the Saragossa manuscript that we talked about,
Yeah.
or I was going to say Inland Empire, but Mulholland Drive, the
Yeah.
David Lynch film. The ending is ambiguous enough, or at least I thought it was, that you could interpret it any number of ways. Would you agree with that, Tenny? Would you, or did you take a
I do
solid
think there is
interpretation of
room,
it?
but for me, I felt like the ending was, we obviously discovered that the woman who was like her agent revealed to come across as, I am the one. I guess you could see it in multiple different ways, but for me, it felt like that was our main perpetrator, and our main girl just went on with her business, really.
But she did find the sort of bin bag full of bloody clothes in her cupboard, didn't she? Her
Mm.
wardrobe.
Hmm.
Do you think was that a dream, or was that how did it got there?
She could have been
Or was there
hallucinating,
more
to
than
be
one
fair.
perpetrator? Sorry, Tenny, say
I was
again?
just saying it could have been a part hallucination too, because I felt like, because of the way the movie was, and you couldn't tell which parts were all real.
Yeah.
Some things, especially with the website as well, I felt like some of the words she was hallucinating, and that was her doing it. So could
Hmm.
have been a bit of both.
I guess this time anyway, maybe I had a more straightforward interpretation previously, but I think this time I entertained the idea that even the concept that her manager there, or whatever that lady's relationship was to her, she was her agent or something, she maybe even all that stuff about her was a figment of her imagination because that she maybe sees these people who on a certain level are kind of exploiting her and shopping her around as a commodity, and that maybe she sometimes sees them as hostile people, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way I kind of was looking at it this time, that maybe that, especially because at the ending, like you say, Tenny, there were hints that perhaps there was still a bit more than meets the eye to what we've seen, So, or
Yeah.
maybe I'm just reading too much into it. I
Read
don't
as much into it as you want.
know. Well, I mean, I think that's what makes it interesting because I think it is a film that you can pull so many things out of it. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's what makes a great film because it's the kind of thing you could watch it again
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
a couple of years and totally get something else out of it.
Yeah.
So it's quite amazing on that level.
Yeah. Well, yeah. What one of the because I've been talking to a friend of mine in Japan actually about these two films. So I thought
Okay.
Cool.
she might give me some insights. And one of the things she said that I mean, the Wikipedia page says it's based on a book called um, Perfect Blue Complete Metamorphosis, but she said it's called Perfect Blue Perfect Pervert. It's the name of the book. Which
All right.
is,
Someone translated it wrong.
Yeah.
I
But
think
who? Which one?
it's a better title, frankly. Something like, or at least something like that. But yeah, one of the things that she noticed is that there's, because it was his first film and it was sort of basically lower budget because it was, he wasn't a big director then. She said that she noticed some of the drawings lacked detail. And say before the goldfish had died, because how goldfish die, they weren't sort of moving, and it just didn't seem as intricate as sort of other anime films. But I mean, you didn't need that to tell the story. The story was
Mm,
still first class, but which is an interesting insight that I hadn't picked up myself. Yeah.
mm. But it is quite, despite the lower budget, it is still quite visually arresting, isn't it?
Oh
There's
yeah.
lots of really clever sort of techniques that he uses to really, so there is an element of spectacle and really amazing sort of imagery and stuff that comes out in the film.
Yeah, really extraordinary stuff. Loads of, I mean, it's so visually very inventive. Really good. Yeah.
I think
Mm,
there's something about early anime that the 90s animation that's really nostalgic. I say nostalgic, but I don't know. I feel like the way they drew characters, they looked more real, they looked more Japanese. Whereas sometimes when you look at some of the more new anime movies and just series, they're very, very bright, or you could say very kawaii, like my art style. And sometimes it's
Okay.
nice, but then sometimes I feel like more with the series than movies, but sometimes I feel like they use the art as an overcompensation to the
mm,
story. So that's why sometimes I really like enjoying the older movies, the older series, because they were more focused on making sure the story was
mm.
executed.
Right, I get it. That's really interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good perspective from a anime buff.
Definitely.
The
Yeah.
official term for anyone who likes anime, gaming, and I forgot what the other bit is, otaku. At least that's the Japanese
Haku,
term.
yeah.
All right.
Yes.
But interestingly enough, in Japan, it's not seen as a good thing. It seems like you're antisocial and you just hide in a bub and you're like that guy and you're like the stalker too. That's what they consider weird otakus. But we in the
Okay.
Western world have repurposed it as a form of identification. But yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
That you're cool, that you like interesting things and you're creative and imaginative and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Definitely
Really. Yeah.
not. That's great.
So was there anything else? I'm just looking at the time and I'm
Yeah.
thinking, is there anything else that either of you wanted to say? I'll give Tenny first shot because she's our guest. So, um, is there anything else, any kind of closing comments or anything you wanted to make about Perfect Blue?
I think I wrapped it up with my animation bit for sure, but I think it's a
Mm,
movie that is timeless. And I think
mm,
that's the really nice appeal of it, that the fact that every time you watch it, you take something a bit new with you. And then I
Yeah.
think as you grow, it's almost like you're looking back at the world. So when I watched it 2 years ago, I was just comparing it to how we are now. And I feel like some things are similar and some things aren't. Like I think this old idolizing culture is still very strong,
Yeah.
and fans, whether they're Japanese or Western, they do get that obsession level and they feel like they know people and they're upset when the idols aren't acting the way that they should do. And then, I
Yeah.
mean, even in anime stories, idol culture and stalkers are still strong protagonists of stories. Like they make the meatiest stuff. There's a show that came out last year, which I think is broken records, called Oshinoko, but it starts off with an idol who gets pregnant and her stalker kills her because he's completely raged that she's been with a man not pure, that kind of thing. So
Oh wow.
I just feel like the perfect blue is like a foundation of stuff that we still see coming in.
Fascinating.
mm.
That's really good. Thank you.
So how about you, John? That's brilliant. Thanks, Tenny. And did Jonathan, was there any kind of last kind of closing thoughts you wanted to?
No. Yeah, no, I think I pretty much said everything. Yeah, I think it is quite sort of Hitchcockian in many ways. That sort of the sort of shadows and the sort of that watching thing, the young sort of protagonist, female protagonist, which Hitchcock liked doing. Yeah, but terrific, absolutely terrific movie, and it is one of those ones that I still feel like I'd like to watch again and
Mm.
again quite soon because it's so much in it. I want to get a bit more out. So yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. And I would agree. I think it's a really interesting, complex film with a lot going on in there. It's very suspenseful, so it works on just that entertainment level, but it's still also got all those layers to it, all the interesting observations about our culture and about
Yeah.
our identity. And I would also say that it goes very well thematically in some ways with Inu-Oh,
Mhm.
which is the next film that we're going to talk about, because that film, in a lot of ways, talks also about identity, about people on the margins of society, and it talks about um, you know their stories and their expressing of that and how they do it.
Hmm.
And it's a great film. And I think we're going to take a little short break because I know that people out there are listening to us and they're thinking, where can I find these guys on social media so that I can comment and let them know what I'm thinking about Perfect Blue. So, folks, if you just we're just going to take a very short break to compose ourselves, but don't go away. Just sit there and listen intently because we're going to have a short break to tell you about our social media stuff, and then when you come back, we're going to talk about our second film, which is called, how do you pronounce it again, Tenny?
Inu-Oh.
Inu-Oh.
Thanks for listening to the Film Swap podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show. You can follow the Film Swap on social media. We're on Twitter and TikTok at Film Swap UK, on Instagram at Film Swap Media, and on YouTube at Film Swap_podcast, and at Facebook at Film Swap the podcast.
And we're back. Listeners, welcome back. Tenny, Jonathan, welcome back. Where did you guys go on your break?
Climbed a mountain.
Did
Went
you?
to
Yeah,
Kyoto.
you went to Japan.
Love it.
Pick up some more anime. Brilliant. Well, whatever you did, listeners, on the break, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll come and visit us on our social media spaces. And also, if at any point you get confused or lose your way, you can always remember very easily filmswap.uk, which is our homepage, our website. And when you go there, you can find out anything, anything you need to know about Film Swap. You'll find links to our episodes, you'll find links to our social media stuff, and you'll also, as the weeks and months progress, you'll get a chance to see lots of other cool stuff because we're only just getting started, aren't we, Jono?
We are.
Oh my goodness. We're going to fill the world with Film Swap stuff.
Mugs, t-shirts.
Mug, yeah, oh yeah, you can get Film Swap mugs. Yeah, if people wanted to get a souvenir, highly collectible Film Swap mug,
Yeah.
T-shirt, tote bags, ball caps, um, anything, you can visit our website, and there's a link there to our spread shop where you can get some Film Swap swag. Let's let's move on to our second film. This was Tenny's recommendation. So Tenny, I'm going to hand it over to you to maybe give us just a brief introduction. Well, actually, it doesn't have to be brief because we're actually proper talking about the film now. So you can take your time to talk as long as you like about
Cool.
Inu-Oh.
Yep. So I recommended Inu-Oh. No, I forgot how to pronounce it. The story follows basically two characters. So one main character, he was born deformed, and it was part of a curse because his father wanted to be the biggest star ever. So he went and used a power. I think it looked like a cursed object if I had to guess, but because of that, he sold his son's life basically to have that power, and it was only thanks to spirit's powers that he even lived, but he came out born deformed and sort of just neglected, treated like a dog, but always had some sort of innate interest in music. Whereas the story starts for the other character, he worked with his dad. They basically went under the water to look for items that are like basically a little bit like Little Mermaid, looking at things that were sunk underneath the sea for ages. And they had a job where they had to collect an ancient item as well. It was requested by some shoguns. And basically, without too many spoilers, the main protagonist on that side, he loses his vision and he loses his father. So he ends up having to find a way to live. He follows some biwas, which is like a traditional Japanese sort of guitar, and becomes a musician. And somehow their paths connect, and it's a way to help our deformed character Inu-Oh become a normal human being again. I don't know if I did it justice, but I feel like that's the gist of it anyway.
No, no, that's perfect. I mean, I wish I could summarize the films so succinctly because when I try and do it, I always kind of ramble on for 30 minutes. But no, that's excellent. And um, we'll get Jonathan's take in a minute, but I really love this film. I really enjoyed it. Not only is it absolutely stunning visually, and it mixes different sort of art styles, and it has some extraordinary sort of spectacle moments, and it's got some really great music in it, which kind of mixes sort of more traditional Japanese kind of folk style and styles with modern kind of popular music styles like rock and sort of
Just to
pop
jump
music.
onto the music note, because one of the reasons why I really love this movie is the person who plays Inu-Oh.
Right.
Um, they are they're basically a Japanese singer, but they're half Japanese and half black. So they've
Okay.
managed to build their career as an artist being like basically mixed, which isn't very easy in Japan from the looks of it. And they've and I don't know because of how this I think like the band's called Queen Bee and the artist is called Anvu, and I think because of Anvu's like experiences, the way that she sings is really different. And
Oh, okay.
hopefully you guys picked up on that, but it's just like the ranges and the way that
Yeah.
kind of mix up with the sort of rocky bits and then also really high pitched sort of like sopranos. I
Yeah.
think I feel like the person they made the role for her, if I had to say, because it just feels so authentic.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. Each of the kind of musical set pieces are are stylistically different and quite amazing range and different sort of types and styles. And without giving too much of the plot away, I guess the idea is that the character who has these deformities, each of the songs that he sings are telling the story of one of these different yokai or different spirits who are sort of accompanying him. And each time he's telling these stories, then the spirits kind of release one of the I guess for lack of a better term, a curse that's on him. So each time he sings one of these stories, his body goes back to a more normal state. Like
Yeah.
at first he has a really
Long arm.
incredibly
Yeah.
long arm, and his legs are weird. But then when he performs each time, one of those elements returns to normal. So there's a bit of sort of magic and spiritual energy that's going on.
Yeah.
And I love just this idea about these the two main characters are again these kind of these people who are on the margins of society or kind of outcasts in a way. They have disabilities, if you will, and they've been sort of pushed aside and they're not treated very nice, but they manage through their creative endeavors and their singing to become very popular and find a voice. And because they are sort of the conduit for the voices of all these spirits who have these stories that have never been told and have been hidden away, it's kind of a really nice way of sort of that idea of these sort of marginalized voices that are get some exposure and
Mm.
get brought out into the mainstream and people get to hear it. And then there's that element of the sort of the shogun who wants to suppress it, and he wants to control what stories get told, and he wants to create an official sort of repertoire. And that kind of brought to mind for me sort of culturally now we live in this situation where sometimes people who don't have a voice and can't speak for themselves, and even sometimes when people do try and discuss ideas and things, they get suppressed, they get canceled, they get pushed aside, they get deplatformed, and all this thing. So it kind of reminded me very much of that idea, of people who aren't able to tell their side of the story, if you will. And I think that's why I really like the theme of the film, and I thought it was quite powerful and quite resonant with us today, I think. How about you, Jono?
I really liked it. Amazing looking film,
Yeah.
and sounding film. And yeah, this character, uh, yeah, Inu-Oh, who has the sort of he has like a gourd mask, doesn't he? And the sort of
Mm.
Yeah.
I mean, is it? It did remind me a little bit of the Elephant Man in a way. He's like a sort of
Yeah.
mythical Elephant Man because you never really see his face. Well, actually, I mean, you really don't see his face. I think you do at least once in the Elephant Man, and his and yeah, I guess one of the things for me is just the sort of the spectacular nature of the film, and you got because he does a lot of sort of concerts, and they're really sort of amazing looking things, and with lots of sort of pyrotechnics and yeah, just extraordinary sort of visual stuff. But then there's also some really what my actually one of my favourite bits in the whole film was where you see from the inside of Inu-Oh's mask, and he's got these sort of two little holes
Mhm.
which he looks through, and the sort of sun is sort of shining through, and there's sort of little sunbursts, and it's I don't know. I just
Mm.
thought that was absolutely beautiful for some reason. Really liked it. But
And when you see the other character too, because his eyesight was damaged in an incident, but he still has a little tiny bit of sight, and they quite sometimes show things from his
Yeah, like the little
perspective as
blur
well.
vision.
And you just get little flashes of light or shape or
mm,
colors. And I thought that was really beautiful as well, because they each time in those moments you really see things from somebody else's perspective,
yeah,
which is a really nice idea. And really, it was really beautiful.
yeah.
Sometimes the way the shapes and the images kind of manifested themselves on screen, and I thought it was really amazing.
Yeah, well, it's yeah, it's beautiful. And you got this extraordinary story, and I guess the sort of background of the sort of these battles.
Mm.
So when I was talking to Hanami about it, she said it's part of because it starts off with this battle in like 1,000 years ago in Japan on the sea, and so one sort of this between two clans, and one of them loses, and sort of basically they all drown. It seems like,
Mm.
and she said, yeah, this battle is the Genpei War, which is taught in schools and all Japanese children know about apparently, well not
Mm.
children. adults as well, because they don't forget it, I guess, hopefully. And but so these this is all sort of takes place in a, I guess, fairly well known part of sort of Japanese history for most Japanese people, I believe. And so yeah, it's like the origins of no theatre, I think. And so there's, I get, from my sort of limited understanding, is there like basically two main types styles of theatre in sort of Japan: kabuki and no. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so no is the more serious one, and that's this sort of story tells, from what Hanami was saying, that they basically, there is some facts known about it, and but this sort of basically Inu-Oh, or Dog King is in English, is a sort of like he's there's some suggestion that there was a character like him, but they don't have a name for him. They don't really know much about him, and this is like a sort of fictionalized version of him. For whereas Ashikaga Yoshimitsu who is the person who is well known for. No, that's the shogun. Sorry, who is it? Is it perhaps Tomona? I think it must be, is the one who definitely did exist. Um, yeah, which is sort of interesting thing, but it feels like there's quite a lot of background history to this one.
Mm.
Yeah. Like I've always heard the term Heian period,
Yeah,
Genji. Is it Genji? Like the Genji I know because of like the 100 poems and that kind of thing. So
yeah,
I don't know about the war that well, but it is always a popular sort of era, I suppose, besides the sort of Nobugana area with Shinzengumi and that kind of thing. I feel like Heian period stuff and Genji has always been
right.
quite popular.
Yeah, I think when I was heard about that, I thought, oh, it sounds a bit like the Wars of the Roses, one of these sort of medieval battles that's just sort of, you know, just resounds through the ages. Everybody likes hearing about these battles.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. The Tale of the Genji. That's one of the famous book, isn't it?
I have it, but I haven't read it yet.
Yeah. All I know is it's supposedly the first Japan's first novel, maybe the first novel ever. I don't know.
All right.
Yeah.
Right. So we know what Tenny's reading after the show. She's gonna.
It's a very big book, guys.
What is it?
It's like that big. So it's just been a bit like I want to read it because I want to get more understanding, but we'll get to it at some point.
Yeah. Perhaps there's an audio book you can listen to, and it takes the pain out of it somewhat.
But anyway, so yeah, the cool thing about all those historical scenes and stuff as well is they quite often use varying styles to represent that. And I love some of the battle scenes. You know, sometimes they'll have like the sort of animated map with the things, and they'll just show all the arrows. And then
Mm.
another time they'll use a different style. And you know, that's a great thing about the film is just it's just such a beautiful film, and all the artwork changes throughout depending on the various situations,
Yeah.
and each of the big musical numbers has, as we were saying, has a different style, but visually it has a different style as well. And they have all those really amazing sort of stage designs, and really clever sort of you know, when they're telling the
Sure
story about the
effects, yeah.
thousand hands or whatever, and at a certain point he just jumps down and all these strings come up and pull up all the arms, you know, up. You know, it's all just sort of clever, really cool stuff like that.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so I just really enjoyed it a lot. Actually, I thought uh, it was really cool.
Yes.
So.
It's also
um,
based on a novel, I think, as well. Interestingly.
Oh,
yeah. And I was trying to look up to see, because I kind of got the impression towards the end of the film that I thought, oh, is this actually based on real historical figures of some kind?
Yeah.
But I suppose it's quite grounded in the history and the lore of that kind of 14th century period, but the characters are fictional, and um, so they kind of do that mix. It's kind of has that kind of feel of like a historical novel, a fictionalized historical novel. So
Yes.
um,
Yeah. Funny
very
enough, while I
interesting.
rewatched it recently, I couldn't help but feel like the way Inu-Oh and Tomari kind of progress as musicians, it kind of felt like there was elements of Queen. I don't know if you guys got that vibe, but like as the songs changed and the performance, it just felt because even the way that they were talking about the way the sort of people who were going there, it's like, oh yeah, they make you sing with them, they make you dance. I just started getting really big sort of feelings like, is this like a Japanese alternative to Queen with the "We Will Rock You"?
Right.
Um,
Well, there are certainly a couple of bits where you could say it just feels like one of those big 70s stadium,
mm,
Yeah.
with all the fairy lights and all the, sort of big bombastic sort of, and even his stylistically, he has kind of a very sort of androgynous kind of look about him, and he does all this incredible dancing and,
Yeah.
somersaults and diving in, and then they'll do things where he'll suddenly have this cape that turns into kind of a parachute, and it's got all different colors, and he comes floating down and then kind of walks across the water, and there's all quite extraordinary visual
mm,
um, uh,
Yeah.
visuals to it, incredible spectacle. And I think this was a film that I would have quite enjoyed seeing in the cinema, actually on a big screen and with
Yeah.
the big sound system and everything, because it certainly has a lot of that grand spectacle about it.
Yeah.
Uh, mm,
And there are these bits where the sort of story sort of dies down, and you just get sort of pure music and sort of dance and
mm,
music together, don't you? And yes, which is sort of what I wasn't expecting, because it's sort of like this sort of historic. I guess that's makes it a bit more contemporary, because it starts off it's all about sort of medieval Japan, and then there's basically this rock concert or a
yeah,
series
yeah,
of rock concerts in it.
yeah.
Except they're not playing guitars; they're playing the whatever it is, biwa,
Biwa.
biwa.
Well, it's quite a thing. Like it has that kind of Moulin Rouge and sort of Greatest Showman sort of thing, where they're telling it's kind of has a historical setting, but then it kind of uses more modern kind of pop music to
Yeah,
to make the story feel more contemporary. And
yeah,
there's an element of that in it as well, because it kind of combines quite well the sort of traditional instruments and things with more sort of the rock guitar or the sort of electronic sort of kind of ABBA sounding
mm,
kind of pop music and
Mm,
stuff. So and it works really well in this, I think. And you're right, it kind of changes style kind of halfway through, because the first part is more just sort of setting up the history and the context and the characters, and then as they develop their friendship, suddenly that it all blossoms visually and musically.
yeah,
And I think that's quite which works quite well as well, because these are two kind of outcast characters who have kind of disabilities and are sort of marginalized, but then when they come together, they find this power that together they can tell these stories and bring all this
mm,
stuff to life,
mm,
and bring large groups of people together to all commune in these fantastic spectacles of celebrating all these stories. And I think that's what's really amazing about it. And well, I mean, you can even tell when I'm talking about it, I'm quite excited about it, because it was a new experience for me. I only just discovered the film, and it's just one of those. I even texted Tenny last night and said I just finished watching the film, and it's absolutely amazing.
which was
Because
music to
it
my
really
ears. I mean,
was.
if you said you didn't like it, I'll be sad.
yeah,
Well, it is. It's just it's good. It's like when you discover a really great film, and it happens to me very rarely now. But when you discover a really great new film, and then you have that sense of kind of like, where have you been all my life, kind of thing. Kind of, it's like, a new love affair started with with this sort of, work of art, if you will. So it's really good. Anyway, you can tell I like it. So
I
if
mean, I felt exactly the way you did when the movie came out into the BFI because before I felt like there was a sort of repeated affair of movies that were coming out in the anime world. It was all just like these young couples, coming of age stories, like, oh yeah, with a mix of whatever dash. And I was starting to feel a bit repetitive. And then suddenly this came, and I was like, it's a breath of fresh air. It feels more Japanese. It feels more different.
Right.
Um, so it was just a really lovely surprise. Because I mean, all movies kind of go through their dip. I think Western movies are slowly becoming a bit repetitive, and whenever a really good movie comes out, we're like, finally. And I think the anime films were kind of doing it, at least whatever comes to the Western world was kind of going down that slope for me.
Okay.
And then
And
it came out, and it felt great.
have you seen any of his other films, the director?
I don't think so, but I would have to search him up properly. I
so
think
you made a film called Mind Game. There's something called Kaba, the Tatami Galaxy, Ping
I
Pong, the animation. I haven't seen any of these. I haven't really. I'm not familiar with them, but I certainly will go and. Some of them are television series
Right.
and things like that. But he has a fairly robust filmography.
Right.
So it's definitely after seeing this, because I think you're right. I mean, the thing, Tenny, when you mentioned about sort of more in modern films, because I think culturally we're at this point in films where they're kind of cannibalizing themselves for inspiration now, and it's
mm,
all kind of reboots and remakes and sort of franchises and things. But I mean, what made this nice is that it ties in very nicely with that line through the Japanese culture, right from where the story's set in the 14th century, and it kind of brings it around full circle to sort of modern times. And although we don't want to spoil it, but the ending has a really nice resonance in terms of how there's always these people on the margins who are expressing themselves creatively and trying to bring their stories out, and even when um, nobody's listening.
Uh-huh.
And
all right,
so
I've taken my look. I've watched two of his other movies he's done.
Okay.
One which was The Night is Short, Walk on Girl, and Ride Your Wave. I think
oh,
the Walk is Short was quite popular. That was like a girl who was just walking with a red string and fantasy, but I remember that one quite getting a few traction.
Okay.
okay, have you seen it?
Yep, I've seen that one.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
Ride Your Wave, but that's it.
Okay. Was that a while ago? Do you have memories of it?
I remember thinking it was okay. It
Oh,
wasn't
okay.
bad, but I didn't think it was like mind blowing. But the Ride Your Wave one was really nice. Like it was a romantic story, but had quite sad elements to it. But I think the animation and the way they kind of came up, a little bit of spirit helping in that one as well, and that was quite good. So maybe I should watch some of his older ones.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, definitely, I'm intrigued enough to investigate a little bit further some of the other stuff because I really enjoyed this one. So,
The music was written by the soundtrack was done by a chap called Otomo Yoshihide, and he's a sort of, I guess, I don't know, experimental rock musician apparently, and
it,
he's recorded albums with Bill Laswell and Jim O'Rourke amongst others. Sort of,
okay.
so yeah.
So, Penny, was that the singer that you were referring to, or is that someone
Uh,
separate?
so I think that was the person who wrote the music. The singer's called Anvu. But yeah,
Yeah.
Andrew. Okay.
their music, I mean, like the band is, I would call them more on the pop side than rock. But again, because of like just the way that they sing, basically Ambu kind of identifies as both male and female.
Mm.
So I think they use that in their advantage on how they sing, because sometimes they sing very high soprano and then they go very like deep rock, which I think you hear in
Right.
Inu-Oh, which works really well anyway. Um, but yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I enjoyed the music. I mean, some of the rock, is obviously fairly simplistic, but what was made it nice was, like I said, when they mixed in those more traditional Japanese instruments, like the drums and or what
Mm,
do you call it, but baiwa,
wow.
biwa. Yeah, sorry about the pronunciation, but so I liked that element of it because I really love that sort of
Mm.
Japanese um, music, more traditional music, and I have a couple of sort of CDs of that I sometimes put on and stuff as well. So I quite enjoy that, and I liked where the mixing of the styles and the stuff, and I thought it worked quite nice, especially within the context of the film and the situations that they were showing. So it was really cool.
it was. It was well unexpected as far as I was concerned.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
fun.
So, was there anything else that you wanted to say? Either of you, obviously, I'll hand over to Tenny first. Is there any sort of last thoughts that you had about Inu-Oh?
I think the whole focus on names was really lovely, and I think
Mm,
it's it's almost, I felt like the message was, it's not just about the name that you have, it's the name that you sort of embody and take on as you, and the
mm,
importance of that for people to find you. I thought was really sweet because sometimes
mm,
you come into this world as you are, but you make yourself what you want to be and you make sure people know who you are. And in that sense, I suppose it was a name. But that's kind of the message that I got from
Mm,
Inu-Oh, which is also why I really love it. And I feel like the ending really wraps up that message in a wonderful way. And it's just, you see them back in the states of how they were when they first met. And I thought it was really beautiful.
yeah.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's really nice. Jono, any last thoughts?
Um, well, it's it's a really interesting film, and I would highly recommend it. Pretty boring conclusion, I guess, from me. But no, yeah, it was not what I was expecting, especially with all that with the music and incredibly spectacular visuals. And it's yeah, I guess this one is differs from Perfect Blue in that if the first one was a sort of cheaper film to make, this one seemed like it had a higher budget
Mm.
and
Mm,
would really benefit from being in the cinema where you could really see the full spectacle.
mm.
And but yeah, good story as well as the pure spectacle side of it. So yeah, go and see it.
I mean, if it comes back on the BFI, I'll let you guys know because I would probably go back to the cinema to watch
Mm,
it.
mm,
It's the
Yeah,
best.
definitely. This is kind of would make a great cinema experience, I think,
it
for
will.
sure. And I mean, I think I've already made myself perfectly clear. I think it's a really good film. I really enjoyed it. Look forward to revisiting again very soon. And I would definitely recommend it to people to go and check it out
Yeah.
if you can find it. Which we touched a little bit on that before in our earlier part of the conversation, but these films at the moment, neither one of them, as far as I could tell, were streaming on any of the major streaming platforms. They're not
Mm.
available. But um, so Tenya, are they definitely available on Crunchyroll?
They're not on. Well, Perfect Blue might be on a different one called Funimation, but Inu-Oh definitely isn't available on main streaming services, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, that's a shame. I being a bit old fashioned myself, I went out and got when Tenny said she wanted to talk about this, I just went out and bought the Blu-ray, which is available from alltheanime.com. So I would say that would definitely be worth picking up because you can watch it again as many times as you want, and and it's very beautiful.
It's such
And
an
for
underrated movie. I'm like, it needs so much more love and support. So again, I'm really happy that we
yeah,
got to talk about this movie because it just went under the radar, which I think is such a shame.
yeah, I mean, literally till you told me about it, I had never heard of it. So for me, it was a real, that's kind of what Film Swap's supposed to be all about. It's about us sharing and saying, hey, you should check this out because um, it's a little bit off the radar. Perfect Blue is also available from alltheanime.com, so they're both from the same company. I've had that for a while. Perfect Blue is a fairly established kind of classic anime film, so it's not hard to come by in terms of on home media anyway. Um, and hopefully, some of the streaming services will sort of get their act together. Hey, you Netflix and Amazon, get your act together and get some more cool anime on
Yeah,
there because you're
of course
letting
you do
you're
that.
letting folks down, and you know what? You're letting yourselves down as well. That's what I would say to them streaming people. You're not just letting your people down. You're letting yourself down. So get more anime on your things.
Yeah.
And on that note, guys, well, Tenny, thank you very much for coming on tonight. You've been awesome,
Thanks
and
for having me.
as always, of course, you're just awesome in general. So Film Swap's the place for you because that's where
You're
we.
only saying that because I recommended one movie you really like.
Absolutely not. It's all true. And Jonathan, we had a couple of hidden guests as usual. Usually, Jonathan has his own dog at his heels, but if listeners detect, um, even after my editing, if you detect strange, odd noises in the soundtrack of the episode tonight, it is in fact Jonathan has an entire kennel's worth of dogs at his feet tonight.
That's very true.
Because you've taken what is it? You've taken in some strays, or you've
Yeah,
taken
well,
in
I
a
got my
neighbor.
sister's two dogs, so I got
Oh,
three. And earlier on, one of them was sort of chewing on a bone, and then later on, another one started whining because it wants to go for a walk. So
oh
you really
dear.
hear those sounds.
Oh, the old "my bladder's scolding me" kind of sounds. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. All right. Well, he they've been relatively well behaved. Every once in a while, you can hear a little sort of strange like "oh" sounds and stuff like that. But that's okay. At least listeners, they're just expressing their opinions on these cool films.
There he is again.
So,
You hear about that?
Tenny, tell listeners where they can find you, and if they want to see some of your really cool art, and just tell us where they can find you and what kind of stuff they should be looking out for.
Yeah, definitely. So, best place to find me is on Instagram. My handle is Cute Genie Art. I do have a TikTok, which I will get round to producing more content for. But otherwise, if you're at MCM Comic Con or Hyper Japan, those are the conventions that I tend to trade at. Um, and possibly Germany or France sometime. If there's anyone from international cons, well, from those countries, I might be there next year.
Brilliant.
Oh, brilliant! So, people, if you're at the Comic Cons, go and try and search her out because she's amazing and she does some really cool pictures and stuff. So, go out and say hello. She's very friendly too, aren't you? So, you can go
Super
and
friendly.
just say hello and have a chat with her. Um, and thanks for coming on tonight, and thanks for providing our artwork and stuff previously. And I suspect we might get a little bit more artwork out of her for this episode as well. But we'll have that conversation off camera. And so, listeners, thanks for joining in. Please go and find these movies. I know it might be a little bit difficult if you don't buy discs and stuff, but go out and try and find these films because they're both really, really interesting, really amazing, and worth checking out. Um, but just bear in mind, certainly in Perfect Blue's case, Inu-Oh is not so bad, but Perfect Blue is not for kids. So
Definitely not.
just wanted to stress that if you sit down with your sort of 8-year olds, you
Not
might
a
be
child-friendly anime at all.
no. But anyway, but it is an amazing, really great film. So, listeners, Jonathan and I will be back in a couple of weeks. We got some other really great guests lined up for the coming weeks, and and uh, and just in general, we're just going to talk about more really cool films
Yeah.
and try and convince you to check them out. And so, on that note, thanks for listening, Tenny. Thank you again, and folks, we'll see you again in a couple of weeks on Film Swap.
Bye.
Right?
All the things these nerdy middle-aged men get up to.